Okay, well, we will go ahead and get started. Thank you all very much for joining us this evening for our February History Happy Hour. My name is Cody Aish, and I serve as Director of Education and Museum Operations here at Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center. On our call as well, just labeled there as Seminary Ridge, is Caleb Kuzmierczyk, our Education and Visitor Services Coordinator. He'll be operating the Zoom side of things for us this evening, admitting folks into the room and monitoring the chat for us as we go along. We're really happy to have you here for this evening for what promises to be a wonderful discussion. I will introduce our speaker here in just one moment, but wanted to take care of a couple pieces of housekeeping first. The first thing that I wanted to mention is that we are just about 2 weeks away. 2 weeks from tomorrow will be our annual symposium, this year called 5 Crucial Days to Gettysburg. This will be Saturday, March 4th. It's going to be Jim Hessler, Eric Lindblade, Stuart Dempsey, our executive director, Pete Mealy, and I will be presenting, each of us taking a separate day in the week leading up to the Battle of Gettysburg. Tickets for the in-person option are limited, but there are still just a couple left. I think less than 10 left. There's an online virtual option, though, if you wanted to stream that. We do have plenty of those options available as well. I'll drop that link for anybody who is interested in more information or to sign up. I'll drop that into the comments here momentarily. The other thing that I'll mention is that our next History Happy Hour, about a month from, or exactly a month from today, on Friday, March 17th. It's a nice thing about February being exactly 4 weeks long. The dates stay the same in March. Friday, March 17th, same time, same place, 6:30 p.m. Our very own Annette Jurgensen, our membership and development coordinator. She's going to be presenting Silk Purse from a Sew's Ear, Fashioning Homespun in the mid-19th century. So we're going to have a bit of material culture there as the focus of our March History Happy Hour. And then, believe it or not, we only have one more in April, and then we'll get into our summertime programming. The very last thing that I'll mention before I introduce our speaker is if you're not already a member, we do encourage you to become a member. If you like the work that we do here at Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, I'll drop a link to the membership page as well. Comes with a bunch of benefits: free museum admission, free cupola tours, invites to special programs, and you also get not just the live History Happy Hour that we do each month, but you can go back and watch all of the recorded versions from the past several years that are available through our member portal online. If you are a member already, thank you for your support. We really do appreciate everything that our members do for us here at Seminary Ridge. Without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker for this evening, Jeffrey J. Harding, who currently works as a licensed battlefield guide at Gettysburg National Military Park, as a freelance historian, a leadership consultant, and a motivational speaker. Nearly a decade ago, he retired from a 33-year career as a civilian employee of the Department of the Navy. A recipient of the department's Meritorious Civilian Service Award, Jeff also received the prestigious honor of being inducted into his command's Hall of Fame. More recently, Jeff has joined with others in a number of sleuthing efforts to resolve mysteries of historical significance, including the subject of his book and presentation this evening, Gettysburg's Lost Love Story, the ill-fated romance of General John Reynolds and Kate Hewitt, published in 2022 by the History Press. And I should note that the book is available in our Seminary Ridge Museum shop. We have signed copies available of it there. It's been our second best-selling book for the past year. Jeff has written articles for several nationally published periodicals and magazines, appeared on the Weather Channel and Penn State's Weather World, and hosted a guided Gettysburg battlefield tour for the commander and crew of the USS Gettysburg. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce Jeff Harding.
Peter, thank you so much. That's very kind. And you read that just the way my mom wrote it. I appreciate it. No, that's way too generous, and I'm humbled indeed. And I am very thankful to you, Peter, Cody, excuse me, and Peter, and everyone at the Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center for hosting me. It's a great opportunity to be here for happy hour. Everybody's in a good mood. It's Friday night, Aloha Friday. I even bought something to drink. If you don't mind, I've got my gin. As my buddy Charlie Fennell always says, hydrogen, oxygen, we'll get along fine for the rest of the hour, I'm sure. So again, thank you for hosting me. It's a great honor. Let me start by also mentioning a couple names. And if you read the acknowledgement section of my book, you'll see there are a lot of names in there. And this book was not written just by Jeffrey J. Harding. This book was written by a lot of folks. It was written during COVID at its peak. So I'm dependent on people all over the place, and I can't name them all, but a few folks I need to name, especially my research associate, Mary Pitkin. She's a genealogist extraordinaire. Had it not been for Mary, probably wouldn't have been able to go down this road the way I did to pull all this information together and create the book. So I'm eternally grateful to Mary. I'm also extremely grateful to the descendants of John Reynolds' sisters, who have been amazingly helpful to me. Three in particular are Mary Scott, her brother John Fulton Reynolds, Scott III, and one other sibling in that family, Carol Eberhard, all extremely helpful to me throughout the process. And then another of John's sisters, and they're all descended from Catherine Reynolds Landis. You also have Lydia Reynolds Evans, and descended from her great-great-grand niece, Katie, now I knew this would happen to me. Katie Cleaver. Katie Cleaver was extremely helpful as well. They've been generous. We'll see a little photo of them in a little while. We'll wrap up with that, but always want to recognize them. One other person, Liz Warner. Liz Warner is actually the great-granddaughter. Imagine this, the great-granddaughter of the man that Catherine Hewitt ended up marrying. After, of course, John's killed and she goes to Albany, and we're going to cover all this. She'll get married. Brief period, 2 years. After she passes away, he remarries. So Liz Warner had the family Bible that had so much beneficial information to us. Always like to give a shout out to Liz as well. So with that, we'll get started. Let me give you a little rundown. And if you've seen, I know I've been fortunate enough to do some things, Adam County Historical Society, did something for the park, of course, with the Sacred Trust event. Matt hosted me on Addressing Gettysburg. So we've talked about the book kind of far and wide, if you will, Pennsylvania books on cable TV, and all wonderful opportunities. But I try each time to share a little something different. The structure will be similar of what I'm going to roll out to you. But what I like to do is provide a couple images maybe you haven't seen before that weren't in any of the other presentations. Some you certainly will have seen, but others I like to spruce it up for each separate group. So again, thanks for hosting me, and let's get rolling here. So number one question most authors are going to get is how'd you get into this? What happened? And for me, it's kind of a threefold thing, and we'll drill down on why I got into this in just a second. Aside from covering why I got into this, why I wanted to write the book, etc., we're going to talk about the protagonist, if you will. We're going to talk about John Reynolds. We're going to talk about Catherine Hewitt. We'll talk a little bit about the things generally people knew about them, and then we're going to start drilling down on all the new things that we were able to reveal. And I say we, again, it's all the people that helped me through the process of researching and writing this book, the things we pulled together that maybe you weren't familiar with. And then we'll have the details for you. And basically anything that I learned, I want to share with you. So I don't know how it works for most people. Some people set out to write a book about something. I did not plan to write this book, but as the process unfolded, I realized a book needed to be written because I was learning so many things that as a historian, I just felt compelled to share. So the whole point of this book is to take what I learned and share it with as many people as I can, far and wide. Ultimately, at the end of the presentation here, what I'd like to do is focus really on Kate Hewitt's years in Albany, because if I'm not mistaken, that's the part of the equation, if you will, that most people are not all that familiar with. They're not well-versed in what happened to her once she went to Albany. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then, of course, the new parts. We've got some great images for you there. So looking forward to this next hour. And of course, as we normally do, I think with your happy hour, we're going to have time for questions. And that's really going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to that as well. So Cody's got a couple pictures he's going to bring up for me as we roll along. So probably best thing to do right now is bring up that shot that you have, Cody, showing John Reynolds and his brother. There you go. All right. I don't know if any of you are familiar with William Reynolds. William Reynolds is right there on your screen next to John. I know you recognize John Fulton Reynolds there as a brigadier general. But William Reynolds was in the Navy. William Reynolds was in the Navy before John went in the Army, of course. But William Reynolds was the focus of some research I'm doing for another book, actually, that pertains to Navy connections to the Battle of Gettysburg. It's something that intrigued me. I have the Navy background. You heard Cody mention that. And then I've been working on these different connections. I've got over 100 connections to the battle, some very intriguing. And one, of course, is the Reynolds brothers. So I was actually working on the chapter of the book that has to do with the Reynolds brothers. And as I worked on that, I began to drill down a little bit on John, revisit what's going on with John and the Kate Hewitt story. Now, that story is one I tell quite frequently, everything I did know about it on my tours as a licensed battlefield guide. Most of you probably know, stop one on a typical battlefield tour. Once you work your way through town, get on the battlefield, first day's battlefield, you're going to stop where John Reynolds met his demise. So I'm going to talk about Reynolds always on my tours. It's one of the first stories I share. But in talking about William Reynolds in my book and wanting to share a little bit about John, started drilling down on this Kate Hewitt story. And I knew, the gist of the story, would always share that. But the more I went to revisit it, the more I realized how open-ended it was and how many mistakes there were online about the true story. So I began to research it, and that took me down the road of the book. And then finally, the last thing that I like to always mention with regard to why the story matters is, if you think about the Battle of Gettysburg, it's colossal, right? 51,000 casualties, 163,000 troops at the battle. Great book by Tom Desjardins, These Honored Dead. Tom did a wonderful job with crunching some numbers to compare what that would be like today. So, for instance, 163,000 troops. 1 out of every 200 people alive in the United States at that time was at Gettysburg for the battle. Can you imagine? All right, so today, how big would that be? We're looking at over 1.5 million people if we have another Battle of Gettysburg today. How many casualties are we going to have? We're going to have about 500,000 casualties. How many are going to die? Well, in the Battle of Gettysburg, we estimate somewhere between 10,000, upwards of 15,000, depending on how you crunch the numbers, are going to die as a result of this battle, whether it's on the battlefield, in hospitals later, prison camps, etc. So if we have that battle again today, folks, we're going to have 100,000, maybe 150,000 die. So I always ask, if you think about Lincoln, think about the Gettysburg Address. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. Now, the question remains, how can you forget if you think about these numbers I just gave you? And therein lies the rub, because numbers don't get it, but stories do. And see, there's stop one. You're looking at the Reynolds marker, generally speaking, where he was killed. And so you begin to unfold that story for your visitors about John Reynolds, secretly engaged to Catherine Hewitt. He's 42, she's 27. They've kept it a secret. Why? Was it religious differences? Maybe it was something else, something that's come to light recently. We're still not certain. The bottom line is he's killed. She has a decision to make. She goes to visit the family, tells them of their love for one another. And this story is a way that you're going to remember what happened on the battlefield and fulfill Lincoln's wishes. He wanted all of us to remember what happened here. So those 3 things, working on the book, William, going back to John, wanting details on the story, stop one, Lincoln's wishes, we're off and running. Let's write the book. Well, not let's write the book. Let's research it and see what we have. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about John and Kate for a second, a few things we know. Now, John, of course, and this is the way a Southerner says it, right? He's from Lancaster. No, he's from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Yeah, that's better. Well, there's the birthplace. That's where John was born and raised. And you can look for historical pictures of this as well. Building hadn't really changed much. Thank goodness the building is still preserved. We can see where John was raised. Thanks to Mike Riley, one of my good friends, helped a lot, wrote a book about John Reynolds, For God's Sake Forward. Very active in making sure that building is preserved correctly. But John's from Lancaster. He's going to go to school not far from Lancaster. He's from a very prominent family. They want him educated well. And he goes to school at the Lidditz Academy for a while, loves it, writes home about his experience. And ultimately, of course, he's going to go to West Point. Now, it doesn't hurt that John's dad is so prominent, John Lancaster Reynolds, and he's great friends with Buchanan, President Buchanan, when he was a senator. John Reynolds' father is helping take care of Buchanan's business interests. Anyway, that really is helpful in terms of getting John into West Point. John's going to go into West Point, do pretty well, middling student. What's his favorite subject? Horseback riding, no doubt about it. But he's there during the key years in the academy. These guys don't realize it at that time, but there's a lot coming. There's a Mexican War coming. And of course, there's a Civil War coming down the road. So there's important years, and the Academy has changed a lot since its infancy, if you will. And by this time, these guys are hard pressed. That's a tough education, but they come out ready to go. Engineering, the number one thing. Don't forget that. All right, let's talk a little bit about Kate. Kate, not so much known about Kate. You know, John, from a prominent family, and there's been history passed down for years. What about Kate Hewitt? Well, that little image, that postcard there is showing Owego, New York. Don't make the mistake. Many have. It's not Oswego. It's Owego over in Tioga County. And that's where she is born. There's been confusion of that, but even as far as Owego, there was some uncertainty. What locked it up for us, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, was the fact that she had a brother. She mentions this to John Reynolds' sisters when she does go to visit the family after he's killed. We're able to locate the brother. We'll talk about that. But that is indeed where she's from. Information is scant because she's an orphan. She tells the family, she tells the Reynolds family she was an orphan. And we tried, my goodness, Mary Pitkin, I don't trust anybody else to do this research. She could not get any further than the names that Kate provided. So these people somehow evaded being in the census. So either the names were wrong, which we don't believe, or they were moving at times where they weren't caught in the census. We could not locate the parents. We did locate the brother, thank goodness, and tie that together. So Kate's raised as an orphan, tough life, always a tough life. And ultimately that will tie into what happens with her future. So a little bit about Kate, a little bit about John. Now let's talk a little bit more about some of the images in the book. You see a couple of unique ones here. This one of Kate is when she's, it's the youngest image we have of her, or the image showing her at her youngest. John Reynolds, that's while he's out in Utah one time, actually. He's there twice, crossing the country. But in the book, one thing I like to point out, and this is not touting my, believe me, not touting my horn. This is telling you the History Press. One of the reasons I went with History Press, and my thanks go out to them always, Arcadia Publishing, History Press. They love to have images in their book. And I love images when I read a book. And let me tell you, we have over 80 in this book, many of them rare, many of them first time published. And we also took the extra step to define things as they haven't been defined before. And by that, I mean this picture of Kate. When was it taken relative to some of the other ones we know of? There had only really been 2 known images of Kate Hewitt. So working with the folks from Military Images Magazine were very kind to me in helping date these images. So you're going to see some of that. If you get the book, you're going to see that and realize in the book, I'll give you an, for instance, when we see Kate Hewitt leaving California to come east on a voyage, same ship John Reynolds is on, the image in the book of what the port looked like, trust me, I went to great lengths to make sure that image shows the port as much as humanly possible as it would have looked at that time. So we're a number of images of the port of San Francisco, but one might have been 1875, one might have been a different time. I wanted it as close. So that kind of effort went into what you're going to see in the book. All right, let's see. I'm going to roll over here and talk a little bit more detail here about some of the things that came out as I got into the book. John Reynolds, what's he doing in the Army? Well, here you got a couple key pictures. And thank you, Cody, for bringing those up. After John graduates, first place he goes, Fort McHenry. Great letter he writes home about being an officer of the days in charge there, the commanding officer somewhere else. Very heady times for this young man. Just got out of West Point. But soon enough, he's down to the Florida coast, and he gets very ill down there while he's on duty, and darn near dies, bilious fever. And the guy that takes care of him, ironically, and writes the most heartfelt note home is Braxton Bragg, of all things. People can't believe when they read this letter that Bragg wrote it about how he's taking care of Reynolds and assuring the family he's going to be okay. After that, he's up to Charleston, but ultimately gets sent down to Texas. Now, this is on the eve of the war with Mexico. And the first place he's at is Fort Texas. Well, Fort Texas is under assault by some of the Mexican forces who are basically trying to trap Zachary Taylor elsewhere. And there's a group of men holding down the fort, literally and figuratively. And Reynolds survives it. There's only 2 fatalities there, One is a gentleman who had been in charge, last name Brown, and it becomes Fort Brown after that. And today it's Brownsville, Texas. But Reynolds survives this, writes home, said, I don't think I could ever be in a worse spot. Well, soon enough, he was, because as the war then begins, you have the Battle of Monterey. It's a siege, and that is akin to what we see in the Middle East over the last few decades, the type of urban warfare. And of course, Reynolds was in the 3rd Artillery, and he's got artillery in this city environment, if you will, and it's really not intended for that kind of operation. But he performs heroically there, as do many others, and he's recognized for it as well. But again, he writes about the terrible situation. He writes how lucky he was to survive it. And this begins to bring to the fore something I never heard discussed much about John Reynolds. You know, we had the tragedy, he's killed there at Gettysburg, but many times before what happened at Gettysburg, John Reynolds is in perilous circumstances, whether it's in peacetime or in conflict. He could have been killed any number of times. And it's amazing, really, how many times he does survive. Some men wrote about the fact that he lived a charmed life, that somehow he was evading, much like Custer. You know, Custer would say that there was Custer luck. And I always say that Reynolds had Reynolds luck up until a point. But he never bragged about it like Custer. That wasn't Reynolds. Buena Vista, huge battle, open, classic battle. And that's where Reynolds was really facing some difficult circumstances. The 3rd Artillery was anywhere and everywhere during that battle. Now, he was under Braxton Bragg initially, but that battery is now under an officer named Sherman, not Tecumseh Sherman, another Sherman. Bragg is a different battery at that time, and Bragg performs heroically there. There's some great quotes from that. But the bottom line is Reynolds performs in all these battles. He sees the elephant, he survives. And now he's finally going to get a chance to go home and rest. And this he does. Now, what's going on with Kate at this time? Kate Hewitt, you got a little town there called Albany. Before we get to Albany, let me explain to you about Kate. And we should, and it's my apologies because I should have given Cody some sort of shot of California or Sacramento, San Francisco, because they play a key role in Kate Hewitt's life. What happens is Kate is going to take an opportunity to go to California as a governess for a well-to-do family. Now, there was confusion over this. One of the first people to write about it was a wonderful researcher, Mary Maloney, in the early 1960s. She wrote about this. The only problem was that supposedly she went to California to work for a G.R. Woodward, initials G.R. You can't find G.R. Woodward in San Francisco. Trust me, there's no G.R. Woodford. But what there is Robert Blinn Woodward. Robert Blinn Woodward was very well-to-do. And it just so happened that he had a brother who married a young lady from Owego. This young lady from Owego had moved to northern Pennsylvania for a while. At the same time, Kate Hewitt's brother, Benjamin, moved to northern Pennsylvania. And then about the same time, they both moved back. Abby was this girl's name. So she ends up marrying Robert Blinn Woodward's brother in California at the family home. Kate Hewitt ends up going out as a governess for this family. Something goes awry. We don't know what. But the next time Kate Hewitt shows up on the radar is in a census report for Sacramento, California. And this is the shocker. And this shocker actually came to light for us, not through the census initially, because we would have never known to look for a woman named Kate Wentworth. Wentworth was the alias for Kate Hewitt. Kate Hewitt boards a ship July of 1861, July 21st, the Golden Age. Same ship John Reynolds is boarding to return to the East to become Commandant, new assignment at West Point. Excuse me, this is 1860. 1860, July 21st, 1860. So Kate Hewitt's getting on the ship. John Reynolds is getting on the ship. There's a reporter on the ship. The reporter writes quite an account of the voyage and the people on it. He mentions people of significance, like General Harney was on the vessel, a few other officers, John Reynolds. But he also mentions Kate Wentworth. Why would he mention Kate Wentworth? Because she's famous, or infamous, shall we say. She had been involved in an affair out there called the Bruton Affair. It's written about in all the papers, number of times. And what it was is this well-to-do gentleman had fallen for Kate Wentworth. Kate Wentworth was plying her trade in the world's oldest profession in Sacramento. And she was going to leave with this gentleman named Bruton and go to the East Coast. There's a problem. Bruton is married. Kate Wentworth, aka Hewitt, is having no part of the fact that he's going to leave the wife destitute. She tells the wife about the affair, returns some money she had been given by Bruton, and Bruton is caught red-handed, and that ends that. So this is scandalous, to say the least. But the real eye-opener is that Kate Hewitt is doing what she needed to do to survive. And not only what she needed to do to survive, but a young girl that she's taking care of as a ward needs to eat, needs to survive. And Kate's doing what she can to raise that young girl. And so Kate is living a life that most of us would have never dreamt that she had to live. But again, we don't know what happened at the household of the Woodwards. But when Kate leaves there, obviously she's on her own and she needs to make money. And there are many, many women who are doing this at the time. Remember, it's the time of the gold rush and there's opportunity there. So you have Kate now somewhere along the line. And I think it was the Bruton affair that spurred this. Kate has an epiphany, if you will. She's going to get out of this life. She's going to start over. She's coming east. And ultimately, she's going to convert to Catholicism. And this will take place at Sacred Heart Academy, Eden Hall, Philadelphia, North Philadelphia, Torresdale. And so she's boarding a ship. John Reynolds is boarding a ship. And sure enough, they meet. They meet. Now they come east together. The ship is going to go down to Panama. They're going to ride by rail across the isthmus. They'll pick up another ship, the North Star. Ironically, how about that for a name? A beacon of hope, a new beginning indeed. They fall in love. The bottom line is they have met, they have fallen in love, obviously have made a commitment to one another. So when they get back east, get to New York in mid-August, John has a few weeks before he has to report to West Point. And ultimately, there's going to be limited time with her. We went into great detail in the book trying to determine when those windows of opportunity were that they may have gotten engaged, when they exchanged rings. You see, John is going to give Kate, as a token of his affection, his commitment, his West Point ring, which is unique, by the way. Back when they graduated from West Point, John Reynolds came out in 41. You designed your own ring. It's a one-off. No one had ever seen it. We have an image in the book. Beautiful, beautiful artist impression based on the description provided by the family, done by Dale Gallen. And I know there's a lot of his great work over at the museum at the seminary. And you see some right behind me, Last Promise. But the bottom line is so elated to finally find out about this ring. But he gives it to Kate. She gives him one gold ring inscribed "Dear Kate" on the inside. They've made a commitment to marry at the end of the war, but they've also got another promise that's involved. And that promise is, most of you probably know this, for those that don't, this is really, really incredible. She tells John she will enter religious life if he were to be killed during the war. So that's her final promise, last promise to him. And only time will tell whether she's going to have to do this. Ultimately, we know the story. John Reynolds leads the 1st Corps Infantry into the battlefield of Gettysburg on July 1st, comes to the rescue, if you will, of John Buford, who's done an amazing job holding off the Confederate infantry. Remember, it's infantry. I always tell people it's varsity against JV. You've got cavalry against infantry. That's no match. But Buford does an amazing job holding them off until Reynolds can get there. Reynolds gets there. He's out in the front lines. He's committed to preserving the ground just as Buford had been, south of town, a little bit east of town, better ground to fight on, trading space for time. But it cost him his life. Cost him his life. And there's a beautiful shot that is in the book. Nice drawing, I should say. Image of this to show, an artist impression actually who's getting firsthand accounts of this. Don't forget Charles Vale, the orderly that's with Reynolds, gives us a great description of this a few times. It's the one that's given the soonest after the battle I trust the most. But the bottom line is Reynolds is going to fall. And that goes back to the story we started with. It's a tragedy for the Union Army. Friend and foe alike respect, revere this man, many of them. But yet the real story involves the family and ultimately Kate Hewitt, the young lady he's engaged to. Now this is going to impact her. So now that promise comes to the fore. Kate's going to have to live up to it. But first, she's got to tell the family. Imagine this. She's in Philadelphia. She's converted to Catholicism. She brought the young lady with her from the West Coast. She converted. She's now Catholic. She's still in the school. Kate's through. She's out of the school. She's waiting in Philadelphia. They are actually planning on announcing their engagement, John and Kate, on July 8th. The plan is to meet the family, if at all possible, on July 8th, when he's killed at Gettysburg. Kate's got a decision to make. She wants to see the remains, grieve accordingly. She goes to Catherine Landis's, John's sister, 1829 Spruce Street in Philadelphia, to introduce herself. There's a knock on the door, July 3rd. The remains had been taken from Gettysburg back to Union Bridge, Maryland, where they're placed in a more or less proper coffin. They had used a stonecutter's box to get him from Gettysburg to there. He's placed in a coffin and packed in ice, goes to Baltimore. He's embalmed in a better coffin, over to Philadelphia, Rittenhouse Square, 1829 Spruce. And there's John Reynolds. John Reynolds is now deceased, and Kate goes to meet the family. And they see how distraught she is. They can't believe as she unfolds the story of their love for one another, how they met coming from California, how they fell in love, their commitment to one another. And oh, by the way, here's this West Point ring. I cannot wear this anymore because I promised him I would seek a religious life. And as a daughter of charity, I can no longer own this ring. The gold ring is also returned to the family. That was on John's person. That had been the big mystery among the men when they saw John's remains and looking at him and they say, what is the fact that he has a silken cord around his neck? He's wearing two medals, Catholic, a cross, and a heart. And he's got a gold ring on his finger, dear Kate inside. Well, sure enough, and his West Point ring was missing. Kate had it, of course. All of this comes to the fore with the family. They had been perplexed by this. Kate solved this riddle for them. She explained the circumstances and they understood. And God bless that family. They welcomed her with open arms and they had a close relationship with her for the next few years as Kate began the process to become a sister with the Daughters of Charity in Emmitsburg, Maryland. Now, one of the misnomers was out there was that this process started soon after he was killed, I believe July 12th. Well, there's actually a letter written from Eden Hall, Sacred Heart Academy, Torresdale, to the Daughters of Charity on Kate's behalf on July 12th, dated July 12th. She doesn't actually begin the process on a formal basis till March 17th, 1864. Prior to that, she has a 3-month period of what they call postulancy at Mount Hope in Baltimore. It's basically a feeling out period for everyone to see if this is going to be right for you. It looks like it is. She begins the process and she's considered a seminary sister at that point for a year. And after that, she receives what's called the habit. She becomes Sister Hildegardis and her first mission is in Emmitsburg, helping with the citizenry there. But ultimately, and now we can go back to Albany, Cody. We can go back to Albany. She's sent to Albany. Now she's with the Daughters of Charity in Albany, but there's a problem. The problem is Kate is suffering tremendously with consumption, tuberculosis. We know this today. It's the cause of death listed on the paperwork from the cemetery. But we know also from the letter she's communicating with the family. We don't have the letters she wrote to the family. We don't have the letters the family wrote back to her. What we have, ironically, is the letters that the family wrote to Charles Vail. You see, Charles Vail would visit Gettysburg with the family. Now, many thought that that was in November of 1863. It is absolutely not. The family visits Gettysburg in November of 1863. Photos are taken of them, and of all places, the Devil's Den, of course, where you see pictures of visitors all the time, and the slaughter pen. And what's not realized not realized, I don't believe, until the book came out, Kate Hewitt's in the picture of the family in front of the Devil's Den. There's an etching done by Katie Cleaver's mother of an image she had. It was taken of the family in the slaughter pen. The etching shows Kate Hewitt. And then there's a photograph the family had of the family in front of the Devil's Den, and Kate Hewitt's in that photo. So it had been known for a number of years that the family visited. They're in the photo. I don't think anyone's ever known that Kate Hewitt is in that photo in the Devil's Den. And in that photo that the family had, that was etching was created from over in a slaughter pit. And the bottom line, she visits, but the family will go back in the spring, early spring of 1864 to visit the battlefield. And Charles Vail goes to show them where Reynolds was killed. Now, this is the time that Kate is down at Emmitsburg, starting the process to become a sister. She's a seminary sister. They're able to visit. They're able to visit Emmitsburg and Kate, two of the sisters at least, and Charles Vail. Interesting. Kate had been making a handkerchief, an embroidered handkerchief, I should say, for John Reynolds. He's killed, unable to give it to him. She gives it to Charles Vail. That handkerchief survives to this day. It's in a museum, get this, of all places, Prescott, Arizona. That's because a descendant of the family of Charles Vail, Fred Vail, was the director of the museum out there. The museum now has the handkerchief and some of Charles Vail's items. In fact, they have a watch given to him by the Reynolds family. They have Charles Vail's sword. It's called the Charlotte Hall Museum. If you're ever in Prescott, you got to go. Tell them to pull out the handkerchief. There's an image of the handkerchief in the book. I had never seen one save for, and I tip my hat to her, Mary Maloney, early 1960s, right before the Lancaster Historical Society had an image of the handkerchief in the book. She was in touch with descendants of Vail at the time. It wasn't Fred. It was, I think, a cousin. And that's how she got an image of the handkerchief. This handkerchief, the embroidery is unbelievable. Now, why are we looking at these pictures? Kate will ultimately leave the Daughters of Charity in Albany. Why? I'm tipping my hat a lot. I'm tipping my hat a lot. But Marion Latimer's book, I think 2005 or so, unveiled the fact that Kate left the Daughters of Charity because she was asked to leave. Can you imagine this? Here's a girl converted to Catholicism. The folks at Eden Hall could not say more positive about her. Her ability, she had a fiery personality, but she held it in check. She did amazingly well there. They wrote a letter each year about the status of what's going on, and they praised her accordingly. She gets to Albany, something's up. Is it the fact that she's lost John, that she's suffering with tuberculosis so bad? We don't know for sure. We do know evidence presented in Marion Latimer's book. It's still at the Daughters of Charity. You can look at it, where the minutes from the meeting where she was asked to go back to her friends and seek life elsewhere. What does Kate do? Now, the thread you're beginning to see with Kate Hewitt is this. This is an amazingly resilient woman. Perseverance should have been her middle name. She's knocked down. She's an orphan to begin with. She goes to California. She deals with what happens there the best way humanly possible, but she's going to start over. She comes back. She converts to Catholicism. She falls in love. She's ready to marry the man of her dreams. He's killed. She picks herself up from the mat. She's going to become a sister with the Daughters of Charity. And now she goes to Albany on her second mission, and she's asked to leave. My goodness, can you imagine this? But what does she do? She buys a house, and it's there in the picture. That picture showing the old cars there, of course, that's taken later. But the third building in from the corner there on the left side of that image, that's 103 North Pearl. That's where she purchased the property. And she would teach school there in a select school, which is basically like a private school. She would also teach, and this is the irony, she would teach with another sister, another Catherine Ryan, actually, who also left the Daughters of Charity. She was the one who was in charge, who really had something to do, I believe, with asking Kate to leave. So I wonder if she knew something about Kate and she felt she'd be better off leaving. I don't know for certain. It's speculation. Bottom line is they taught together in a school. They owned that property together for a while. Kate bought her out later. But that other location, Pemberton Corner. That's a famous little spot in downtown Albany, 81 North Pearl. They taught there. Now, here's something for you to contemplate. Look at that building. There were many things. There was a store in that building. There were several other things, but there are two individuals in that picture. I have no idea who they are, but I'm going to tell you, there's a little boy in that picture. He's dressed up. Maybe he's with one of the women. Then again, right? Then again, maybe he's a student in a school. And those two ladies, could that be Kate Hewitt and Catherine Ryan? We don't know. We don't know. Probably not, but it's something to think about. Bottom line is Kate bounces back once again. But there's more to the story. Now, if I'm going to leave you time to answer questions, I'm going to have to wrap this up, but we'll get into this probably some more in the Q&A. Cody, do we have some more pictures for him? There you go. What's this all about? Well, what this is all about is the family Bible on one side of the screen and the records, the original records. This has been reproduced in a book done by the Troy Genealogy Society. But a wonderful lady named Peg Harrigan went the extra mile for me. She went to a church in Albany now that holds the records for St. Joseph's. St. Joseph's is no longer active, but this other church, Sacred Heart, has the records, and she dug them out. That's the marriage records for Kate Hewitt and Joseph Fort. The P in front of the name is silent. It's a family Bible showing when they were married. June 24th, 1874, Kate Hewitt marries. Finally, marries a man she loves. She had met him prior to this, of course. How? The family owns a florist business right around the corner from St. Joseph's, where Kate is active teaching in a school for the Daughters of Charity. Now, they obviously met while she's a sister with the Daughters of Charity. She leaves. She's now able to have a relationship, and the relationship blossoms, and they get married. All the while, don't forget, she's suffering with tuberculosis, consumption. Let's take a look at another picture here, Cody. Let's take a look at some more up there. There's the church, St. Joseph's, where she was married. There's an image in the book of the inside of this church. This is one of the most spectacular buildings ever built in Albany. Beautiful church. It's a shame what's happened to it over the years, fallen into great disrepair, many efforts to restore it, what have you, and ultimately unsuccessful. It's very sad. I was up there in October and heartbreaking to see what's happened. But the bottom line is she gets married there, Kate Hewitt, to Joseph Ford, and they're going to begin their life together now. They will live above the Florence business, which is on Broadway Street, right around the corner from where the church is and from where the Daughters of Charity had their location where Kate was teaching school. So let's look at another shot, Cody. All right, what in the world is this? What in the world is this? Talked about Kate Hewitt's embroidery skill. One thing that had been lost to history, yes, she created the handkerchief, and Charles Vail ends up with it. This woman had some of the most amazing embroidery skills known to man. She is well known in the area for some of her fine works, sold at different craft fairs, if you will, done for different organizations, so much so that she's asked to create a banner for the Philadelphia Centennial Exhibition. There's a women's pavilion there. First time ever there's going to be anything like this. This is a colossal event. 10 million people attend, one out of every 4 people in the country. Kate Hewitt's banner receives an award because it's so spectacular. So spectacular. You can read an excerpt in the book. This thing gets covered far and wide. There's a reporter for a Chicago Tribune who writes about this in such glowing terms, it's almost unreal. But I want you to read it if you get the book and understand how talented Kate Hewitt was. It's a shame we've looked for this. Trust me, A to Z, upside down, sideways back, cannot find the banner, not even an image of it. But the real irony, Kate Hewitt, the woman of perseverance, triumph over adversity, picks herself up. She gets married, living a life, but now tuberculosis is going to take her away from us. On October 6, 1876, just 2 years of marriage, she'll pass away. And there's one of the obituaries I was able to locate, working with Mary. So fortunate that so much is out there these days online and what have you. Just read this for a minute. Just look at this. Yesterday afternoon, passed peaceably away the wife of Joseph B. Fort, the florist. The lady had been ailing for some time. She was a true Christian woman, and her death will be deeply mourned. Prior to her marriage, Mrs. Fort, then Miss Hewitt, kept a select school on North Pearl Street. At one period of her life, the estimable lady was a cloistered nun in the Roman Catholic sisterhood. Folks, this is Kate Hewitt. This is the woman that had evaded discovery ever since the battle. People had been trying to find out what happened to her, what her true fate was. We knew she had gone to Albany. We knew she had taught, but from that point, the road diverged. This is Kate Hewitt. And Kate Hewitt is buried at St. Agnes Cemetery in Menands under the Fort family stone ever since until June of 2021, with many kind folks donated to put a stone in memoriam to Kate Hewitt. Now, Kate Hewitt is in that family plot. We just don't know which grave within the plot she's in. They did not record that detail, but I was able to locate from the original records of the cemetery the lot purchase paperwork that showed that Joseph Fort, the day after Kate died, went out and bought that lot. For my money, she's got to be in grave number 1. Where else would you put her? But not being certain, we'd said in memoriam. Let me show you one more shot. And there you have it. This past October, I had the privilege of attending the roundtable for the Capital District Civil War Roundtable Albany. I was invited to speak. My good friend Wayne Motch was there. Wayne played such a key role, wrote the foreword for my book. But these two ladies are the great-great-grandnieces of John Reynolds' sisters. In the orange vest is Mary Scott, descended from Catherine Landis. And on the other side of the picture in the black sweater is Katie Cleaver, descended from Lydia Reynolds Evans, John's older sister. So they are the ones among the other family members so helpful, and God bless them. They both came to this event to formally dedicate Kate's new stone, and this is what gives you chills, they had never met. They didn't even know about one another. And both of them now are fast friends, as you can imagine. And that's one of the things that humbles you and makes it such a pleasure to be involved in a project like this. So that's a lot of information in a little bit of time. I will encourage you to buy the book, not because I need to sell books or want to sell books, so that I can share more with you. The bottom line is, it was a lot of fun. It was an amazing ride. Mary Pitkin kept digging stuff out. We worked together, and we finally solved this this issue of what happened to Kate Hewitt. And I think it's a fitting story. I think she's an amazing lady. It was an honor. It was an honor to somehow be blessed to be able to unfold this story. And it's an honor to be here with you all on Happy Hour. I'm going to my gin. It is Friday night. And I think now, Cody, we can take a few questions.
Absolutely, we can. And thank you very much, Jeff. That was a wonderful talk for a wonderful book.
Thank you.
We do have a few questions coming into the chat here. Ed asks, he said, first of all, thank you for the talk. Most informative.
You're welcome, Ed.
What do you think is the biggest misperception on this topic? Or what do you most often hear? Much appreciated.
Yeah. So, okay, a couple things. The biggest misconception on the topic, and this is no criticism of what took place prior, because all my research really stands on the shoulders of others. There have been a number of people over the years. Galena Ingram Heights, I mentioned Mary Latimer, Mary Maloney. So each step, and I'm sure after me, who knows what's going to turn up? Maybe more letters from the family. But for years, probably last 10, 15 years, it was thought that there was a woman in Stillwater, New York, who was indeed Mary Hewitt. Catherine Mary Hewitt was the woman that was engaged to John Reynolds. It wasn't her. So that's probably the biggest misconception. We now know who the Catherine Hewitt was that was engaged to him. There are little pieces of the puzzle out there. Certainly, we didn't know about the California years. Little things drive me crazy when I go online and read about Catherine Hewitt being a nun. Now, many of those that are raised Catholic, you have nuns, right? But what I learned dealing with the archivist who was so helpful to me, Scott Kiefer down at the Daughters of Charity, they aren't considered nuns with the daughter of Cherry. They're sisters. So there's little nuances like that. You'll see that in the endnotes in the book. I try to address most of that.
Gary just has a comment. He says, "Thank you for a fascinating book. I enjoyed it very much."
Nice, Gary. Thank you.
Dennis asks, "What happened to Kate Ward, the young girl?"
Yeah, how about that? There's another mystery. There's a gentleman named Frank Burns that's written about this, and I don't think he's gotten to the bottom of it either. So that's another mystery still out there. We know she's at the Eden Hall Sacred Heart Academy probably to about 1866. It says in there, the records say she was married after that. We could not find her. Mary and I looked in earnest. We do not know her ultimate fate. Not that we won't revisit it someday, but that's an open book. So if somebody wants to dig in, I'm on another project now. I'm all about the weather during the Gettysburg campaign. Stand by. That book's next, hopefully. Yeah, I might come back to that someday, but hopefully somebody else can go ahead and find out. I'd love it.
And on the note of weather, I was going to mention it to everyone, and this is a good place to say so. For those who listen to Battle of Gettysburg podcast with Jim Hessler, Eric Lindblade, Jeff had a wonderful episode on that. I guess it was last summer or so about your research on the weather. And you had an article in Gettysburg Magazine, correct?
That's correct.
On the Jacobs records. Yep.
Thank you for mentioning. Appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah. Susan asks, "Did John Reynolds know about Kate's past?"
Yeah, there's the real $1 million question. Susan, you're all over it. And we don't know because he never wrote about it. I was thinking about it today, actually. And of course, I thought about it a lot. But it seems to me that Kate's coming back on this ship. We don't know for certain at this point that she's intending to convert to Catholicism at that point. John meets her. Let's just think about it for a minute. He's fallen in love with her. But maybe the idea springs forth in their discussions that if he knows about her past, that maybe this will make it right. And let's do this, and then we can ultimately roll out our engagement, announce our engagement, etc. So to answer your question, we don't know whether he knew. And really, I'm on the fence. Whether he knew or not. I think when you meet somebody, you probably have a little bit of feel for what kind of background they maybe have had. She was certainly a smart lady. You'll read in a book about her education. She writes a letter to a newspaper in California when they were criticizing her for this Bruton affair. And boy, she lays them out. She talks about what right do I have to hypocrisy that some others, So basically, she's been dealt a bad hand and she's doing what she can. But she puts it so eloquently, it's amazing. To put an excerpt in the book because of that. Smart lady. Reynolds probably knew she was smart. I don't know if he sensed anything. We do not know, unfortunately.
Greg asks, "Did Reynolds write about her at all?"
Did Reynolds write about her? Oh, Greg, man, you know what? I've talked to the family about this many, many times. I'm like, can we go to some attics? Somewhere there's got to be some letters. Reynolds had letters found in his valise from Kate Hewitt, so they find the gold ring. They know his West Point ring is missing, etc. And a silk cord around his neck, and these two letters. And these letters, and I bring this out in the book, they are both sealed, wax seal. You know how they used to do with envelopes and everything. And they're sealed with John's West Point ring. So Kate's writing him. I can't imagine he's not writing her. The problem is, and I even talked to Liz Warner about this. I said, Liz, is anybody in the family? In the first place, how about the cross suit? Because we want to know, was it a crucifix? Was it just a cross? What was it? Nothing. And I hope and pray, I really do, that someday some of this turns up somewhere. The letters between Kate and the family, nothing. And we don't know if, Ellie Reynolds was really the keeper. You go on Franklin and Marshall website, the letters are there. And she kept a scrapbook of all these letters that John Reynolds wrote. How could somebody that diligent with maintaining the family records not keep these letters from Kate Hewitt? Is it because she found out that Kate married, or because she found out Kate left the daughters? Why did Ellie not keep those letters? Or did she? And we haven't found them.
Susan asks if we know where his West Point ring is today.
It's a family. That's the family. Thank goodness. The family has some treasures. Let me tell you, they, again, have been amazingly kind to me. When Reynolds is out in California, one group of citizens give him a gold watch for helping protect them from the Native Americans who had been giving them some problems. This is out at Fort Orford in Washington State. That gold watch is still with the family. I've held it in my hand. It's like, okay, this is just crazy. You know, the hair goes up on the back of your neck. And of course, some of the things that the family originally had are now at the visitor center. You can see the kepi, pictures some of this in the book and what have you, John Reynolds' sword, these things. So it's amazing. Thank goodness that the family respected the value in these things in terms of preserving them.
One of the artifacts, since you mentioned Gettysburg National Military Park and the visitor center, I'll share another image for everyone to see. In the Seminary Ridge Museum galleries on the fourth floor in the morning room, some of you who have been to the museum, I'm sure have seen this. It's been on display for a couple of years. But this is a handkerchief that comes to us on loan from Gettysburg National Military Park. As you can see, it's a handkerchief embroidered J.F. Reynolds, and we have long believed the provenance from the park suggests that it is embroidered by Kate. And as Jeff has talked about this evening, her fine embroidery skills and the handkerchief for Charles Vale. And so a piece of Reynolds and Kate Hewitt artifact here that you can see if you visit Seminary Ridge Museum, thanks to our friends over at Gettysburg National Military Park and the National Park Service.
Absolutely. I'm so glad they loaned that to you. And I think they have one other one over there. Do they not, Cody? I'm trying to remember whether...
I think we had talked about that. I believe that they might. Yeah.
But theirs isn't on display, I don't believe. So thank goodness you have yours out. And I mean, yeah. And there are some other embroidery items in the family that I know of too. But that's to think that, you know, I mean, is there some DNA on there? It's like, yeah. And I haven't seen the other handkerchief, and I need to get to Arizona to see it in person. You know, because in all candor, it's in the book, but seeing something like that in color is quite a different experience, and seeing it in person is altogether different.
Certainly.
Yeah,
We're pleased to have it on display, you know, being one of the closest buildings to where John breathed his last. You know, it kind of brings that story full circle on this site.
Absolutely.
Any other questions anyone has? Feel free to drop them in the chat there if you do. We'll wait a moment here. If not, I'll just recap one more time. Jeff's book is Gettysburg's Lost Love Story, The Ill-Fated Romance of General John Reynolds and Kate Hewitt, published in 2022 by the History Press. Beth here with actually, we do have a question here. Who were Kate's parents?
Kate's parents, the mom's name is written a couple of times differently, Germina or Germina. And I'd have to look real quick in a book to tell you who the dad's name was. Forget what his name was offhand. It's been a while. I was talking about this today with my lovely bride that, you know, you do this research and you're knee deep in it, but that was like 3 years ago. So hopefully I'm doing justice to the memory of it. But yeah, I don't have it offhand here real quick. Apologize for that. Let me go over here and see. If you got, how long you got there, Cody? Before
we have a few minutes here. That's no problem.
You got a few minutes. Okay. All right. Let's see. Because I hate to leave somebody in the lurch here as far as, and it's amazing because there are so many Hewitts in Pennsylvania, New York, that you would think that you could find it. You know, I didn't mention Kate's brother, and I think I might have mentioned his name briefly, Benjamin. The nice thing of being able to tie together the Owego thing is that Benjamin actually attended Kate's funeral. There was a newspaper report a few weeks later from Owego mentioning that Benjamin had been to Albany to attend the funeral of his sister. So that really tied it together for us. And then we have an image of his gravesite in Owego. He was actually a postmaster out there. So we have that. And let's see if I can get a name here.
Richard, I just pulled it up here.
Rich, oh, good man. Yeah, and I'm just now looking at it. Richard and Jemina or Jamina, whether it's a J or a G. Where do these names come from as far as our knowledge of these names? When Kate entered the Daughters of Charity, she would have those names on the paperwork there that still at the Daughters of Charity. Also, when she enters Eden Hall, the names are there as well. So that's where we get the names. That's what we went for. Many Richard Hewitts. We thought we had a couple close, could never nail it down. And, you know, the early census, the kids' names aren't listed either. So that makes a little bit of problem. But the good thing was New York has the census on the 5-year, so you had that. And that helps us later clarifying this Kate Hewitt versus other Kate Hewitts, where people were at certain times and what have you. So, but yeah, those parents, that's if somebody solves that riddle, then that's $1 million answer there if you can find it.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Jeff. And in closing here, just a couple more laudatory comments in the chat here. Thank you. Very interesting. We'll definitely get the book. Fascinating talk. Thank you so much. And thank you to Seminary Ridge for bringing this to us. It's our pleasure to bring you these stories from wonderful authors like Jeff. And finally, what a fascinating journey. Thank you for sharing. And on behalf of Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Jeff, for being here. This has been a spectacular evening.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cody.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Happy Friday.